Okay, so it's my first week back in the Lords after a very long summer recess. We're only here for 2 weeks, would you believe, because then it's closed down for 3 weeks for party conferences. But anyway, we're back. And we're back allegedly in normal times now because anyone can go in the Lords and it's packed. And I have to say that it's a bit like being the new girl back at school again because I don't really know what I'm doing because they've gone back to different rules. So the best way to explain it is that all those lists that I sometimes didn't get on and moaned about now don't exist, and you have to jump up and down. I'm sure that's not the technical phrase, to intervene in debates. And so I actually haven't done that yet, and it's very nerve-wracking. The only thing which has lists are the questions. But I was struck as I sat in a packed chamber that it will be more interactive. It will give me an opportunity to, I hope, hold the government to account a bit more. But it also struck me how alien the place is from my whole life and everything I want to do. I've thoroughly enjoyed the summer working with the Academy of Ideas and on the Academy of Ideas Battle of Ideas programme. And the next big, huge Battle of Ideas festival is on the 9th and 10th of October, and it's the People's Takeover of Westminster at Church House, and I hope you come along because I really do think that's where politics really happens, not necessarily in the parliamentary building. One of the things that was a shock was when I walked in the first day, I didn't wear a mask because we're back to normal. And then I looked round and I was the only person who didn't have a mask on, and there was hundreds in there. And I then found out that they've actually panicked a little because they've said we're going back to normal. They've changed a few things and now demanded in the Lords that you have to wear masks, which is very galling and irritating because it, of course, again, emphasises nothing is normal at all. They've also changed the rules that instead of being able to bring in guests, which quite a lot of Lords had organised to bring people in for cups of tea or lunch or what have you, that you can now only have one guest per peer, and that's for essential business, and they're being quite prescriptive about that. So, as with everything in terms of the return to new normal, nothing's ever really the old normal. There's always these ifs and buts. The main thing that is a return to the old normal, well, the old normal as we've got used to it over the last 19 months, is that we can see that there's a huge democratic deficit. I don't mean in terms of the Lords, which is already itself, its existence, a democratic deficit, but actually in the Commons, because this week alone, and there's only been, 5 days of this week, we've seen a government introduce a social care package which, regardless of what you think about it, breaks manifesto promises from the Tories, was introduced very quickly, and MPs were only given, less than a day to look at the details of it. And actually, I have read the social care package, and the problem is not so much national insurance, is that this is really about taxing people to cover for the NHS and the deficit and the mess it's in and the terrible backlog of cases that have been caused by lockdown, but there's no acknowledgement of that. And so consequently, whilst it's dressed as helping solve the social care crisis, actually it's a NHS SOS rescue package really, and the public are paying, and we can expect to see a lot more. But my big complaint is that there's no democratic debate about these issues, and they just in the end get through. And secondly, just before we started back in the Lords, the vaccines are, the minister in charge of vaccines went round the TV studios, Nadim Sahawi, basically declaring that after lots of humming and hawing, they are going to bring in vaccine passports by the end of September. Now this, it seems to me, is completely in the face of any evidence that they're effective, certainly from the point of view of transmission. It's going to cause a papers, please society and exclude people from public life based on a medical decision they've made, and I'm very worried about its liberalism. And I've written about that, and I'm going to carry on going on about it. But the big issue again is he went on to the TV channels and said this. It's very unclear when or if there'll be a vote on it in terms of the Parliament. I've just made the point that actually Parliament breaks up in a week's time for the party conferences for 3 weeks. That takes you to the end of September. So if they're bringing it in at the end of September, what will that mean? And for organisations like the Academy of Ideas, who are organising an event like the Battle of Ideas Festival, are we going to have some ridiculous, legally mandated nonsense that we have to impose on people in order to attend our event. It's utterly demoralising for the hospitality trade, for anyone who works in any kind of public events work. But it's an affront to freedom that such a serious matter should be discussed with such glibness in TV studios. And although there was questions and answers in one of the committees in Parliament yesterday, it nonetheless feels as though it's been rushed through, usual story. So democracy, I'm afraid, has really become one of the casualties, part of the collateral damage of the lockdown period, and I'm very concerned about that, and I hope to make an issue of it as many times as I can. One thing that was quite nice yesterday was that we had a cross-party APPG. That meant that there were MPs and people from the Lords from all the parties who got together to discuss some of the impacts of lockdown and the recovery from lockdown, and we were planning it. And it was just really nice to be in a committee room with real people, and I felt as though it was the first time that I'd been in a sort of grown-up parliamentary decision make, or at least some amongst people who want to make a difference and are talking about holding Parliament to account. So that was a kind of big move forward. In terms of what's coming up, all week I've hardly dealt with any legislation because why? The Environment Bill. The Environment Bill is everywhere and anywhere, and the reason why it's dominating this part of the parliamentary time is simply to get it passed before COP26. I mean, it's as bad faith as that. And practically all of the ridiculous amendments that are being added by the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, all of which I've argued against when it was at report stage earlier on, are now effectively being passed. They're kind of being voted on. The other thing that's happened is that there's real life voting. And because I haven't always been there till late at night, I've missed the votes because we used to be able to do it automatically. So of course that's really good because you should have to be there and you should have to walk down the corridors. But the reason why I don't feel guilty about not having physically voted is because I oppose the amendments to the Environment Bill, but I don't support the Environment Bill's core ideas either. So actually, I am an abstention. Things get serious next week because they are having the second reading of the Police and Crime Bill. And I intend to follow that bill through, oppose the attempts at criminalising demonstration. That will mean, and you'll be bemused to hear this, that I will be supporting the right of Extinction Rebellion to protest, which obviously, as I can't stand anything about them and they are utterly anti-democratic, is weird, but I don't want our annoyance with them to mean that we end up with less freedom to protest. But there's also lots of other very draconian aspects of the Police and Crime Bill which I will be speaking about, so I get my first chance at that next week. The final thing that you need to know is that we've just had instructions that it is better that people do not read their speeches and that they actually speak spontaneously. And anyone who knows from watching the films of me with my endless pieces of paper and rewriting of speeches, this terrorises me. It's absolutely the right thing to do. It should be spontaneous. You should actually speak from the heart and so on. But a lot of people will be learning speeches by heart, and I can't do that. So who knows what's going to happen? It's not mandated, it's advised, and I think I'll be reading that Police and Crime Bill speech because it's a long one and I will make a mess of it otherwise. But I'm going to start practicing just speaking without notes, and I'm going to make a lot of messes, and you will be able to laugh at me when you see my films. But that's the reason I'm doing it, and I have to get used to it. My final thing is Twitter in real life. Many months ago, in an exchange with Nadhim Zahawi, he said that there would be no vaccine passports. I said in reply on Twitter, can I hold you to that? And he said, you have my word. Since then, he's obviously gone back on that promise, and consequently he's now advocating for vaccine passports, although yesterday he said it goes against everything I've ever believed in, but I'm advocating it anyway. So, But what has happened is that reassurance to me and him giving me his word has become almost a meme on Twitter, and people are obsessed with holding him to account on the basis of what he said on Twitter. And I just think that's not the right way to do politics. Those of us who are opposed to vaccine passports can't deal with this by calling for Nadhim Zahawi to resign because he once said to me on Twitter that he was giving me his word. Who cares, right? This isn't gotcha politics. We have to positively win the arguments for a free society without vaccine passports. And I think it's an abdication on the freedom lovers' side, on my side of the argument, that we fail to do that, can only do it negatively by trying to humiliate and shame-face politicians. That's not the kind of politics I'm interested in. Nadhim Zahawi can answer to his own God, his own conscience, his own political principles. What we need to do is come up with much better arguments for why we shouldn't have these passports. And there are lots of good arguments around. Look out for Big Brother Watch, and look out for articles in Spiked. Look out for the work done by a range of organisations that are giving us the arguments that we need. I'm wearing all black now because I'm going to go into the House of Lords and ask a question, maybe, if I'm on a list. But I'm then off to a funeral. And so I want to dedicate this film to the person whose funeral I'm going to, who's Catherine Harborne. Catherine Harborne was died far too young, prematurely in her 50s, of cancer. She stood as a Brexit Party PPC, and that's where I first met her as a parliamentary candidate at a policy discussion, and she was formidable. She was a scientist, she was highly smart, intelligent, really had her eye on the ball, wanted real evidence-based policies rather than the kind of pseudo-evidence that we often hear, but also was understood that we could not live in a technocracy either, and that we had to have a more political approach to policy issues. When I first met her, I was intimidated by her, and then I kind of came to really admire her, and she is a fantastic speaker. And the world has lost, not only her family have lost a wonderful mother and sister and aunt and so on, but also I think that public life has lost someone in Catherine Harborne. And when I sit in the House of Lords, when I look at the shenanigans going on in the House of Commons, I think I wish that Catherine Harborne was in here, because she would be the kind of woman who could really make a difference. And in the time that she was alive, she did make a difference. And she was brave and courageous enough to stand for the Brexit Party, which as always would mean that she was controversial and sometimes lost friends. But what she did led the way. And so this is a tribute to Catherine.